Accountability for Trump coming at the state level and the federal level. Special counsel Jack Smith also alleging Trump plotted to illegally discount legitimate votes, interfering with the sacred right to vote and to have your vote counted. And that gets to the heart of what this is all about. Yeah, Trump was desperately trying to cling to power for his own personal gain, but his alleged actions amount to widespread voter suppression, part of a broader Republican push to make it harder to vote after record turnout in 2020. Consider that in 2023 so far, over 300 anti-voting bills have been introduced in 45 states. And Georgia is one of the most prominent battlegrounds.
Governor Kemp has signed that controversial election bill.
The new law limits ballot drop boxes, makes it a misdemeanor to hand out food and beverages in voting lines, and requires a photo ID to vote absentee.
Georgia will take another step toward ensuring our elections are secure.
The ACLU of Georgia and other organizations are claiming the law restricts absentee voting and discriminates against black voters.
President Biden today called the Georgia law an atrocity.
It's anti-democratic. Is un-American.
And so here's the big question. Though Trump's moment of reckoning has finally come, will it curb the attacks on voting rights? Joining me now to discuss is Nsé Ufot, a longtime voting rights activist and organizer. She was an integral part of turning Georgia blue in 2020. She's also the founder of the New South Super PAC. Nsé Ufot, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So I want to say this. I keep pointing out to people, he doesn't get nearly as much smoke as Abbott in Texas or Huckabee in Arkansas or DeSantis in Florida. But isn't Brian Kemp just as terrible, if not worse, than any of these other governors when it comes to suppressing the vote on the ground in Georgia? And isn't that sort of highlighted again in his sort of ambivalence about this whole conspiracy that was happening in the state under his nose with Donald Trump?
Absolutely. And I will remind your audience that Governor Kemp was the Secretary of State in 2018 when he ran for Georgia. Secretary of State, for all intents and purposes, is the chief elections officer, the person responsible for maintaining the integrity of the election. He was sued several times by my organization and others for continuing Georgia's long history of voter suppression, particularly targeting African Americans and young people. And he refused to resign as Secretary of State while he was running for governor. In fact, he didn't resign until it was time for him to be inaugurated as governor of the election, in which he also oversaw when he was playing on the field and the referee. So, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
One of the things also, I want people to understand this because, again, sometimes we're looking at this from 3,000 feet away. It's like, oh, wow, this is part of Trump. This is part of January 6th. This is part of what happened. But this conspiracy, the fake electors, attacking voting machines, being abusive and threatening local election workers, that had an impact on the ground. Talk a little bit about how Fani Willis's indictments sort of highlight the challenges that you face on the ground in Georgia and how this conspiracy was a lot bigger than I think some people realize.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, not to invoke, political phrasing from decades past, but it was a vast right-wing conspiracy to overturn the results of the election, to interfere with elections, not only in Georgia, but also in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, targeting cities in particular with large Black voting blocks in their cities. When you think about the scope and the scale of the conspiracy, of the effort to interfere with the elections, identifying 535 alternative electors, having them sign affidavits, forging documents, impersonating officers, public officers, that there were elected officials, current office holders from the state of Georgia who were also participating in this. And it literally goes to the highest levels of both our federal and state government. And so for people who think that this is just one man's bad behavior, and even if he was lying, it wasn't criminal, or even if they're willing to expand it to his 18 named co-conspirators or 30 unnamed, indicted co-conspirators, that It is so much larger than this. And that's why DA Willis is bringing in the RICO statute, that it is a tool that allows the state to sort of tell the full story. The breadth of staff and resources that were committed by the Trump presidential campaign, the Trump organization, is in fact, they are going to present evidence that they were functioning as a criminal enterprise. And so again, this is not one man's bad behavior, that this was, in fact, it appears to be a conspiracy with dozens, if not hundreds of people, including elected officials and donors.
And one thing I want to point out very quickly, we only have a little bit of time. This hasn't stopped, right? Brian Kemp has passed these kinds of laws. So even if this particular plan to overturn the federal election may be stopped now because of DA Willis's indictments, it doesn't mean there aren't still people in Trump world on the ground trying to guarantee his victory in Georgia in 2024, right?
Yeah, no, I will tell you that between Brian Kemp and the disgraced former president of the United States, Donald Trump, they are both in their Diddy bags. They can't stop. They won't stop. And they are going to continue on this path. We saw it. It didn't stop in 2020 when Trump lost 50 lawsuits. It didn't stop in 2021 when the Democrats got a governing trifecta with the House, the Senate, and the White House. It didn't stop through the 2022 legislative session. And in fact, it has spread. And so there are Trump types running for state government, Trump types running for municipal government, the attacks on the vote, the attacks on absentee balloting, the misinformation, the disinformation, those things continue, as well as the threats of escalating violence.